Under a swollen, ink-black sky, the Appalachian Trail stretched before him like a living serpent. Jonah's boots crunched along the narrow path where twisted trees and gnarled roots clawed at the earth. His breath emerged in cold puffs as he ventured deeper, where the shadows were thick with secrets older than time itself. The air carried an eerie hush, broken only by the distant howl of a wind that whispered through the pines, a warning, or perhaps a lament. At the edge of dusk, Jonah recalled the legends he'd heard from old hikers, stories of restless spirits and inexplicable vanishings. Each tale, passed down with trembling certainty, insisted that the mountains held a sinister truth. As he walked, memories of a local guide's caution reverberated in his mind. Don't stray from the path and never follow the whispers. But the allure of the unknown, mixed with a fierce curiosity, pulled him deeper into the labyrinth of the wild. Night fell like a shroud. The moon was a ghostly lantern overhead, casting silver beams that danced erratically over the rugged terrain. Jonah's eyes darted to every rustle in the underbrush and every flicker of movement among the trees. It wasn't long before he detected a sound, a low, rhythmic tapping that did not match any known creature's gait. The sound came from a thicket up ahead, where shadows coalesced into shapes that defied explanation. Tentatively, he approached. The tapping grew louder, accompanied by a soft murmur that might have been human speech or a trick of the wind. Then, without warning, the sound ceased. In the sudden silence, Jonah's heart pounded as he scanned the darkness. A figure emerged, a woman draped in an antiquated dress that fluttered as if caught in a perpetual breeze. Her face was shrouded in pale luminescence, and her eyes held a sorrowful void. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Her tone was neither welcoming nor hostile, but it carried an unmistakable warning. Jonah tried to speak, but his throat was parched with terror. The apparition slowly receded into the night, leaving behind a lingering scent of decay and wildflowers. Determined to uncover the truth behind these apparitions, Jonah pressed on until he reached an old, dilapidated shelter, half consumed by ivy and time. Here, he discovered remnants of a hasty escape, discarded camping gear, a journal, and eerie sketches of strange symbols scrawled on scraps of paper. The journal belonged to a man named Elijah, whose desperate hand recounted encounters with unspeakable phenomena. Elijah wrote of voices calling from beneath the earth, of a malevolent presence that moved like fog among the trees, and of a time when the trail itself seemed to awaken as if in protest. Jonah's pulse quickened as he flipped through the pages, each entry more disturbing than the last. The final entry detailed an encounter with a creature that was neither animal nor human, a monstrous entity with eyes that burned like embers in the dark. The words bled with terror and regret. I have seen what should not be seen. The trail is a living, breathing nightmare. It hungers for souls. I must run, for it is coming. A sudden rustle from outside startled him, snapping his gaze back to the doorway. The moon's silver light revealed a pair of luminous eyes staring directly at him from the darkness. The creature was hidden behind the fallen beams, a contorted mass of limbs and shadow, its movements jerky and inhuman. In that fleeting moment, Jonah felt a primal terror surge through him. The creature advanced slowly, each step deliberate, as if savoring the fear it elicited. In a burst of adrenaline, Jonah grabbed the journal and fled, stumbling back onto the trail. The forest erupted in cacophonous sounds, branches snapping, leaves rustling, and the monstrous sound of something large and unfathomable pursuing him. The night became a blur of frantic running and heart-wrenching terror. Every turn on the trail felt like a plunge into the unknown, each shadow hiding a new horror waiting to pounce. At one point, Jonah stumbled upon an abandoned campsite. The remnants of a fire still smoldered, and among the ashes lay a crudely carved totem. It depicted a figure with outstretched arms and hollow eyes, its surface marred by the passage of time and etched with symbols that glowed faintly in the moonlight. A chill ran down his spine as he realized that this totem was identical to the sketches in Elijah's journal. It was a marker, a signpost of the supernatural forces that stalked these mountains. As he continued, the forest seemed to conspire against him. The trees twisted unnaturally, their branches forming grotesque shapes that mimicked hands reaching out to grasp him. The very ground seemed to pulse, as if alive with an unseen heartbeat. Every sound, the crunch of leaves, the rustle of wind, and even his own ragged breaths, echoed with malevolence. Jonah's mind was filled with the ghostly warnings and the tragic fate of those who had dared to wander these cursed paths. The line between reality and nightmare blurred, and for a moment he questioned whether the trail was a figment of his haunted imagination. Yet the weight of his terror, coupled with the cold, tangible presence of the entity chasing him, convinced him otherwise. In a desperate bid for safety, he sought refuge near a narrow creek, where the gentle gurgling of water offered a semblance of calm. But even here, tranquility was an illusion. The sound of his pursuer's footsteps, a slow, measured cadence, echoed along the water's edge. The creature was relentless, drawn by the same mysterious hunger that had claimed many before him. Jonah's survival instincts took over. He recalled a trick from his grandfather, a seasoned hiker who had warned him about the treacherous spirits of the mountains. Light. Without a match or a lighter, Jonah scavenged for dry twigs and leaves, piling them into a small, desperate fire. As the flames leaped upward, their light danced on the dark water and cast erratic shadows on the surrounding trees. The creature hesitated at the edge of the light, its form wavering like smoke in the wind. For a brief moment, Jonah felt a glimmer of hope. The fire might be a deterrent. But hope was fleeting. The creature's form began to distort, its eyes reflecting the firelight as it advanced slowly. The flames did little to stave off the ancient evil, and Jonah knew that he had only bought himself a few precious moments. With no other escape visible, he took a deep breath and plunged into the creek, submerging himself in icy water, praying that the cold might cloak him in invisibility. As he floated in the dark embrace of the water, the creature's voice echoed behind him, a low and mournful sound that reverberated in the depths of his soul. "You cannot escape the trail. You are a part of it now." The words mingled with the rush of the creek, a dissonant lullaby that promised an unending nightmare. When Jonah emerged downstream, shivering and soaked, the night had transformed into an endless, oppressive void. The trail twisted unnaturally, leading him in circles, each turn deepening his despair. Time lost meaning, and every step was haunted by the feeling of unseen eyes watching from the shadows. The whispers of the wind now carried voices, indistinct murmurs that spoke of past horrors and the inevitability of fate. In the final hours of the night, Jonah reached a clearing where the trees stood in a circle, their trunks scarred with strange symbols. In the center lay a stone altar, covered in moss and ancient runes. The air around it vibrated with a sinister energy, as if the very ground beneath him pulsed with malevolence. The voices grew louder, a chorus of despair that drowned out his thoughts. Here, it seemed, was the heart of the curse, a nexus of all the pain and terror that had plagued these trails for generations. Summoning every ounce of courage, Jonah approached the altar. In that moment, the specter of the woman in the dress reappeared. Her eyes, filled with a sorrow that spanned centuries, met his. "To end this, you must confront the truth of our past," she whispered. "Only then can the cycle be broken." Trembling, Jonah placed Elijah's journal at the base of the altar. The symbols carved into the stone began to glow, pulsing in rhythm with the distant beat of an ancient heart. The ground trembled as if awakening from a long slumber, and the air thickened with the scent of decay and forgotten memories. The creature's guttural growls echoed from the surrounding forest, merging with the spectral voices. As the glow intensified, a vision overtook Jonah, a cascade of images, guses each more harrowing than the last. He saw a time when the land was sacred, a place where ancient peoples revered the spirits of nature. But greed and betrayal had shattered that harmony, unleashing a curse that had seeped into the very soul of the trail. The creature, the woman, and countless lost souls were all bound to this unholy force, a force that demanded sacrifice to satiate its hunger for vengeance. In that instant, Jonah understood. The trail was not merely a path through the wilderness, but a scar upon the land, a wound that festered with the pain of centuries. His own journey had been foretold, a final chapter in a story written long before his time. With a heavy heart, he accepted his role. Placing his trembling hand upon the altar, he allowed the curse to claim him, hoping that in his sacrifice, the balance might be restored. The forest fell silent. The oppressive presence that had haunted Jonah all night slowly receded, leaving behind a fragile stillness. As the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, the trail appeared less ominous, its dark secrets momentarily at rest. But the memory of that night, the whispers, the relentless pursuit, the unyielding horror, would forever linger in the hearts of those who dared to walk the Appalachian Trail.
Story number 2.
The moon hung low over the crumbling remnants of a mining town swallowed by the forest's relentless grasp. Michael stepped cautiously through the rusted gates of what once had been a thriving community, now reduced to skeletal buildings and whispering ruins. The air was heavy with decay and the scent of damp earth, and every step stirred memories of lost lives and forgotten tragedies. In the center of the town stood an old saloon, its windows shattered and doors hanging crookedly on their hinges. Drawn by an inexplicable pull, Michael approached the saloon as a chill, unnatural breeze swept past him. The wind carried murmurs of voices long silenced, and for a moment he imagined seeing spectral figures dancing just beyond the edge of sight. He pressed on, determined to uncover the secrets that lay buried beneath the town's tragic history. Inside the saloon, the floorboards groaned underfoot. Dust motes floated in the dim beams of moonlight that seeped through the broken roof. Michael's flashlight beam cut through the darkness, illuminating faded photographs pinned to a wall. A family here, a group of miners there, each image exuding an aura of sorrow. As he stepped closer, the sound of a single, discordant piano note echoed through the silence. His heart pounded in his chest as he followed the sound toward the far end of the room. At the back, where a battered stage once hosted lively performances, a grand piano sat in eerie isolation. Its keys were worn and stained with time, yet they glowed faintly as if imbued with an inner light. With trembling fingers, Michael pressed one key. The sound that emerged was not a note but a cry. A sound of anguish so profound that it rattled the very walls around him. The piano's melody, sorrowful and warped, filled the room with an overwhelming presence, and the ghostly figures from the photographs seemed to waver in the corners of his vision. In that moment, the temperature dropped sharply, and Michael's breath turned to mist. Shadows elongated, twisting into shapes that defied logic. An indistinct figure emerged behind him. A miner in tattered overalls, his face obscured by the brim of a dusty hat. The spectral miner's eyes, hollow and pitiful, locked onto Michael's. A silent plea passed between them, laden with regret and terror. Before Michael could utter a word, the figure vanished into the surrounding gloom, leaving behind a silence more oppressive than the darkness itself. Driven by a mix of dread and resolve, Michael retraced his steps to a narrow side street where a faded sign read, "Hollow's Reach." He remembered local legends of a mine collapse decades ago that claimed the lives of many, whose restless spirits were said to haunt the area. His pulse raced as he made his way toward the mine's entrance, a yawning mouth in the side of a hill, draped in creeping vines and sorrow. Inside the mine, darkness pressed in like a living entity. Michael's flashlight revealed jagged walls slick with moisture and veins of minerals that glittered with an unholy luminescence. Every sound was amplified. The drip of water, the creak of settling rock, and his own rapid heartbeat echoing off the stone. The deeper he ventured, the more the atmosphere grew thick with despair. At a fork in the tunnel, he discovered a crude shrine carved into the rock, adorned with relics that looked as if they were offerings from another era. A rusted lantern, a tattered cap, and a battered pocket watch frozen at midnight. The items radiated an aura of deep sorrow, and Michael sensed that this was a memorial to lives abruptly ended by tragedy. As he lingered, he heard a soft tapping behind him, a slow, deliberate sound like a miner's pick striking stone. Turning, he saw a silhouette emerging from the gloom. The figure's outline was hazy, as if made of the very darkness itself, and its presence seemed to distort the tunnel's light. Without a word, the apparition raised a hand toward the shrine, and the relics began to tremble. The pocket watch ticked erratically, the lantern flickered with an unearthly flame, and the cap slowly levitated into the air. The spirit's expression, though obscured, radiated deep anguish and an insatiable longing for release. Michael's heart pounded as he realized that the ghostly miner was trying to communicate, urging him to uncover the truth behind the mine's fatal collapse. Guided by the spectral figure, Michael ventured further into the labyrinth of tunnels until he reached a cavern that vibrated with a low, mournful hum. In the center of the cavern lay a massive rock formation, upon which was inscribed a series of desperate messages in charred, almost illegible script. The messages told of greed, betrayal, and an ill-fated decision to cut corners in safety. They spoke of a catastrophic collapse, and of cursed souls trapped beneath the weight of their sins. Michael's blood turned cold as he read the final frantic lines. The earth will reclaim what is rightfully hers. Our cries shall bind us until forgiveness is found. The air in the cavern thickened with the oppressive force of the past, and Michael felt the weight of countless souls pressing upon him. The spectral miner reappeared beside him, his presence now more insistent. In a voice that was barely audible above the cavern's rumble, the spirit pleaded, "Set us free. Carry our story. Let the truth be known." The words were laced with sorrow and despair, as if the spirit had borne the burden of endless regret. Torn between fear and compassion, Michael resolved to honor the miner's wish. He gathered the relics and the trembling echoes of the mine's haunted past, vowing to document the tragedy so that the world might never forget the lives lost in its dark depths. But as he stepped away from the cavern, a violent tremor shook the tunnels. Rocks tumbled around him, and the mine's passageways collapsed in a cacophony of destruction. In the chaos, Michael sprinted toward the exit, the spectral miner's presence urging him onward with desperate urgency. Bursting into the cold night air, Michael found himself surrounded by a swirling storm of dust and debris. The ancient mining town behind him seemed to groan under the weight of its own memories. As he looked back one final time, he saw the spectral miner standing at the mine's mouth, his face etched with a tragic smile of relief and sorrow. The spirit slowly faded into the night, leaving Michael with the heavy knowledge of the town's dark legacy. In the days that followed, Michael struggled to put the horror he had witnessed into words. The story of Hollow's Reach spread like wildfire, a cautionary tale of human greed and the unyielding grip of past sins. Some dismissed his account as the ramblings of a traumatized soul, while others believed that the tragic voices of the lost miners were finally being heard. But in the quiet moments of dusk, when the wind whispered through the forest and the ruins of the old town moaned with memory, Michael knew that the spirits of Hollow's Reach still roamed freely, bound by a curse that demanded remembrance and redemption.
Story number 3.
Under the heavy gloom of a waning autumn dusk, a single car wound its way along a desolate country road toward a once-forgotten asylum perched at the edge of a dense forest. The building loomed like a dark monolith, its crumbling facade shrouded in creeping ivy and the whispers of a tormented past. I pulled up to the iron gate with a mix of trepidation and morbid curiosity, the air thick with the scent of decay and the promise of unspeakable secrets. Stepping out, my boots crunched on brittle leaves as I made my way toward the entrance. The massive double doors creaked open with an almost sentient reluctance, revealing a lobby bathed in flickering, unstable light. Shadows played tricks on my eyes, twisting into grotesque shapes that seemed to lurk just beyond the periphery of vision. Each step echoed in the vast, empty hall, where tattered draperies and peeling wallpaper testified to years of neglect and sorrow. The silence was profound, yet it was intermittently broken by distant sounds, a faint, rhythmic tapping, as though someone were drumming a slow dirge from deep within the building, and soft murmurs that could have been the wind or something far more sinister. I wandered past old reception desks and rows of dusty chairs, each one whispering remnants of the lives that had been lost here. Faded photographs and tarnished frames adorned the walls, faces contorted by despair, eyes full of unspeakable pain, and mouths frozen in silent screams. Their ghostly gazes followed my every move. I found myself drawn to a narrow corridor leading to the former patient wards. The passage was lined with cells that had once imprisoned not only bodies, but broken minds. As I stepped forward, the temperature dropped abruptly. My breath became visible, a series of icy puffs dissolving into the gloom. In one cell, I caught a glimpse of movement, a flash of pale, translucent figure disappearing behind rusted bars. For an agonizing moment, I was sure I heard the soft sobbing of a long-forgotten soul. I pressed on, heart pounding, each step measured against the relentless pull of the past. Further down the corridor, I came upon a door slightly ajar. A dim, pulsing light emanated from within, accompanied by the soft hum of what sounded like an eerie lullaby. Drawn by a force I could neither name nor resist, I pushed the door open. The room revealed itself as a once treatment chamber, where rows of rusted medical equipment sat abandoned in the dusty gloom. In the center, an antique mirror rested against the wall, its surface warped by time and secrets. As I neared it, the reflection rippled, and I saw not only my own startled face, but a myriad of other faces. Gaunt, sorrowful visages of patients long since gone. Their eyes pleaded silently, as if begging for liberation from the tormented fate that had bound them here. A sudden, low moan echoed through the chamber, drawing my attention to the far corner where an old wheelchair lay. It began to rock slowly on its own, creaking rhythmically as if in tune with an unseen heartbeat. The hairs on my arms stood on end, and I fought the urge to flee. Instead, I found myself compelled to investigate further, as if the asylum itself were calling me deeper into its labyrinth of misery. Venturing into a series of twisting hallways, I soon discovered a staircase that spiraled downward into the bowels of the building. The air grew heavy with the pungent smell of rust and stale antiseptic, and the walls seemed to pulse with a life of their own. I descended into the lower levels, where the oppressive darkness was punctuated only by the trembling beam of my flashlight. Here I encountered a vast underground chamber, an abandoned vault that once served as a holding area for the most desperate of souls. Faded scrawlings and cryptic symbols were etched into the stone walls, the remnants of desperate messages left by those who had suffered unspeakable torment. In the center of this vault, a battered metal cabinet stood slightly ajar. Inside, I discovered a collection of personal belongings, yellowed letters, a frayed scarf, and a faded photograph of a woman whose eyes were filled with infinite sadness. The moment I touched the photograph, a cold hand of realization gripped me. The asylum had been a repository of pain and abandonment, a place where the living had been forsaken and the dead had been left to whisper their tales of misery. Without warning, the cabinet slammed shut, plunging me into suffocating darkness. A low, multi-tonal voice echoed around me, a lament, a plea, and a threat, all wrapped in one. "Remember us," it murmured, the sound vibrating with sorrow and a bitter, unyielding rage. The words slithered into my mind, unbidden and insistent, dredging up images of faces contorted in terror and eyes that had witnessed horrors beyond imagining. I could no longer tell where my thoughts ended and the voices began. Panic surged, and I bolted for what I hoped was the way out. Yet the corridors twisted and contorted as if the asylum itself were rearranging its bones to trap me within. Doors led to dead ends filled with stale echoes, and every turn revealed more ghostly apparitions, pale figures gliding silently down hallways, their expressions etched in eternal anguish. I felt as though the very building was alive, each creak and groan a heartbeat in the chest of a monstrous, grieving beast. In a desperate bid for escape, I found a narrow window that overlooked a courtyard choked with weeds and broken masonry. I scrambled through, leaving behind the oppressive weight of the asylum, only to step into an even colder night. The courtyard was barren, the sky a leaden canvas from which no stars shone. The ancient structure loomed behind me, its windows like dark, watchful eyes. I stood there, trembling, convinced that the souls I had encountered would follow me beyond those cursed walls. But freedom was an illusion. In the dead silence of that forsaken yard, I began to hear the murmurs again, a soft chorus of voices, blending with the rustling wind. They spoke in a language of grief and malediction, a litany of regrets that clawed at the edges of my sanity. Every rustle in the underbrush, every shifting shadow, became a reminder that the asylum's curse was not confined to its walls. It had seeped into the land, into the very air I breathed. Over the following weeks, the horrors of that night refused to let go of me. My dreams were invaded by the mournful wails and spectral figures of the asylum, and every shadow seemed to hide a lurking terror. I began to notice small signs, a familiar pattern in a puddle of rainwater, a face flickering briefly in a shop window, the soft, unending whisper of "remember us" in the dead of night. No matter where I went, I could not escape the relentless memory of that place. Late one stormy evening, as I sat huddled in the dim light of my apartment, there came a gentle yet insistent tapping at my door. My heart pounded as I approached, half expecting to confront another apparition. When I flung the door open, there was nothing but a gust of cold wind and the faint, echoing sound of footsteps receding into the darkness. However, on the doorstep lay a single, worn photograph of the asylum, a grim memento of that night, its image both beautiful and horrifying in its melancholy. Now, as I write these words, I feel that presence once more. The voices of the forsaken, the aching memories of the lost, and the cursed history of the asylum continue to haunt every corner of my existence. I have learned that some places carry scars so deep that they never truly heal, that the anguish of the past can seep into the present like ink spreading through water. And as the echoes of that night linger in the recesses of my mind, I know that no matter how far I run or how desperately I try to forget, the asylum will always call to me with its haunting refrain, "Remember us."